It's been 5 years since civil war first broke out in Syria, and that time hundreds of thousands have been killed. About half the country's population has been displaced, both in and outside of Syria. Charlie Sennett, founder of the Ground Truth Project here at GBH, has traveled to the region several times over the past 5 years and joined me to talk about where things stand now and the path forward. So Charlie, about a month ago when I talked to you on the radio, when John Kerry said we're on the verge of an imminent ceasefire, or whatever you want to call it over there in Syria, you were skeptical. Is that a fair statement?
Very skeptical.
Okay, 2 weeks in, give or take a couple of days, where are you now?
Well, I have to reverse my position. This is a more enduring truce, if we can call it that, than anyone had anticipated. We're at 2 weeks and counting, and it's really holding. I think it's a really positive sign, one that is surprising a lot of people in the region.
What's positive? That there's a truce, or that negotiations are going somewhere, or both? What's the deal?
Well, I mean, what's positive is people aren't dying, right? So we have 300,000 people killed in this war on the 5th anniversary and counting. And at least for the last 2 weeks, we've been able to limit the counting of the dead. It hasn't been a full ceasefire because you still have elements that are fighting in there, but largely holding, and that in and of itself is very important. It leverages some very important things that are ongoing right now. The talks in Geneva, which hopefully will yield real negotiations, with this sort of tenuous cessation of hostilities. It's hoped that the talks will do better, go further than anyone anticipated there. And you also have a situation with the Russians now announcing that they're going to pull back, which is also critical and tied to this truce.
In the talks, ISIS and Al-Qaeda not involved, obviously, correct?
Right, that's right.
The thing I don't quite understand about the talks, though, is I don't understand what the goal is. Usually, when you see some international thing, you say, well, the ultimate goal, even if it's not fully achievable, is X.
Yeah.
But for one side, the ultimate goal is Assad has got to go.
Right.
The regime has got to be ended. For the other side, it's, well, wait a second. It's far better to have a stable killer, for lack of a better expression, than have an unstable government of killers who we don't understand. So how do you ever get anywhere when you don't even agree on what the ultimate goal is, much less the means?
It's a good point, but I mean, the ends of brutal wars like this one in Syria often don't have an ending with a dream of democracy. It's really about ending a nightmare that's ongoing, and that often is what motivates the parties to come to the table and stop the fighting.
I want to go back to 2012 and tell me if this infamous comment by the president has complicated the whole thing. This is the infamous red line comment.
Okay.
Here it is.
We have been very clear to the Assad regime, but also to other players on the ground, that a red line for us is we start seeing a whole bunch of chemical weapons moving around or being utilized. That would change my calculus. That would change my equation.
Looks like Barack Obama's son, I'll tell you from them. So obviously the red line never quite materialized. He said, you know, ultimately it just never happened. Does that complicate where we are now? I don't even understand what the United States' position in these negotiations is.
I think it's a fair question. I do think the Obama administration has been very vague on what it wants to accomplish in Syria, why it's been so hesitant to go in and try to really engage with this conflict. We've taken a sideline while Russia has gone in. This is a big proxy war. The Saudis are supporting the Sunni elements. The Iranians are supporting the Shia elements. It's a mess. That red line was crossed, and I do think this has been a policy of fits and starts for the Obama administration. I think Secretary of State Kerry has brought some coherence to the policy. I mean, we have shifted to diplomacy. Diplomacy right now, in this moment, appears to be working. We often forget that the war in Syria begins with the Arab Spring. Those were demonstrations in the street that were pro-democracy demonstrations and nonviolent. They were crushed by the regime. That created violence, which spurred an armed opposition, which then splintered into Islamic militants. We have to remember that the way the Middle East works, all parts are interconnected. That's why it's a proxy war. And if you really dial it back and you think about a 100-year history, and I do think this war and this Arab Spring are a 100-year event, we're talking about the lines formed in World War I slowly vanishing, and the region really being recast.
One of the things you guys do great at Ground Truth is you inject the human element. I mean, as horrific as 300,000 killed and millions displaced and what, 4 million refugees is, whatever the actual number is, it's not a human equation.
Right.
Tell us what we're about to see.
Sure. So we spent time in the refugee camps in Syria, on the border of Syria, in Jordan, and in Lebanon. And what we came across were the stories of women and children in particular that really reveal the human side of what it is to be a refugee.
And we're about to see a family with a 13-year-old daughter who is married off. Let's watch this.
هلا بتول عمرها 13 سنة ونص. شباب كتير يعني مشاكلهم كتيرة، كل ما يشوفوا حدا يصير يتطلع زيادة مثل التحرش، يعني حتى نكون ماشيين نحن حدا نتضايق كتير. أول فرصة صحت لنا إنه نجوز بتول ونرتاح من هيك قصص.
اصلا يعني حاسين حالنا ميتين، معيشين حالنا غصب عنا كرمال اولادنا. ما بتحبي تعيشي، يعني ما في شيء مشجع للحياة.
في اللي مشجع أولادنا بنطلع فيهم هيك بنلاقي هالدنيا.
We feel like we are dead. So part of the reason why they agreed to this marriage was because of the harassment, but money. I assume survival was a piece of it too, no?
It is a piece of it. I think protecting their daughter and protecting their family. And how often do you get to hear the story of a child bride from the parents' point of view and the enormous regret they have? I mean, the World Health Organization indicates that the leading cause of death for young women in places like these refugee camps is childbirth. And you know, this is an extraordinary burden on her. She feels like she's lost her childhood. Imagine how you'd feel. And what we can't forget is this isn't just a sort of indifferent couple marrying off their daughter. This is a tortured couple with no other option.
So briefly, if we can, let's talk refugees. When you see families like that, we have committed to take a pitifully small number of people by September this year, 10,000 in the U.S. We're not going to come close to even 10,000, are we?
Among the 10,000, if my numbers are accurate right now to date, it's under 500 who have been admitted within that 10,000 number. And it's 2,000 total, which compares to 1 million, which Germany has taken in. And the much larger numbers, for example, look at Jordan, tiny country.
Quarter of their population,
taking
right?
in 1.2 million refugees.
I'll tell you, Charlie, you and your colleagues, to put a human face on these horrors is just something that all the world needs to see. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Jim.
Charlie Sennett. You can find more of Charlie's work along with the rest of the Ground Truth Project team at thegroundtruthproject.org.